Bula bula. Bula bula. Okay, forgetting. Now, I'm not going to lie, this is the second time I've actually tried to film this video today, and I got to 22 minutes, had to pause it, and the whole thing just died on me. So I may be a little pissed off that I'm having to go through this again, but let's do this. Let's do this. Today, I am, for a second time, going through forgetting and the two explanations that you need to know. This is not the most difficult bullet point. The explanations, I think they're quite easy to understand. I do have a few anecdotes that probably took up most of the 22 minutes, and I will go through them again. But today we are looking at forgetting. So let's start off with the two theories that you are actually going to be doing. Now, remember, so far in memory, we've looked at how good your memory is, or isn't long-term memory really long, and short-term memory is really, yeah. Now is the sorry, that was a terrible impression of students. Now is the time that I'm going to be going through two explanations: interference and cue-dependent forgetting. This is why memory goes bad. So this bullet point and the next bullet point are looking where memory fail us, where we have maybe false memories, and how your memories are so influenced by the environment, both internal and external. So we're going to be looking at interference and cue-dependent forgetting. These are the two explanations. Both of these explanations, by the way, can be split down into two smaller explanations. So, for example, interference is made up of proactive and retroactive interference, whereas cue-dependent forgetting is made up of state-dependent forgetting and context-dependent forgetting. And let's start at the beginning. So, why do we forget? So, before we start this, one central question we have to ask ourselves is, why do we forget? There are two potential reasons. Is it a case of the memory is deleted? As in, we no longer have that memory. We have literally pressed delete and permanently forgotten that memory. That would be an issue of availability if that happens. Most people don't really believe that happens apart from in short-term and sensory memory. In long-term memory, once it's in long-term memory, it's in there. What most people believe is an issue of accessibility. So accessibility is when you have the memory, you just can't reach it. And it's the whole, do you know the whole tip of the tongue phenomena where you know it. Oh, what's the name? The memory is there, but you just struggle to reach it because of a variety of reasons. So an example I had of this a couple of years ago is when I was in Costa and I was in the queue and I noticed one of my former students and I could not remember her name at all. It was there. I knew it was there. And it was annoying me. I was getting closer to her and I was like, I remember like stuff she did. I remember she stormed out my class in a huff once, and because I was having a go at the whole class. I remember this. I remember she quit college, didn't see it through to the end. I remember this. And I just couldn't remember her name. Looked for a name badge, couldn't see anything. And she was like, oh my God, hello, how are you? And I was like, yeah, how are you, nameless person? And then, like, honestly, 10 minutes later, I was marking my work in Costa. I looked up and just daydreaming, just kind of looked at her, Katie, and her name was just there. So sometimes we can't quite access the memory. We need a little bit of time to be able to get to it and then know what it is we're talking about. So let's start. And by the way, that's what most theories we look at are. It's an issue of accessibility. You haven't deleted the memory. You've merely lost access to it. So let's start with interference to begin with. Interference is split into retroactive and proactive, but we need to know what interference is generally, and it's basically the idea of when one memory disturbs the ability to recall another. Use that term, please. And this is more likely going to happen if the memories are similar. So we get similar memories much more mixed up with each other. So, for example, you sit in, roughly speaking, the same chair in psychology class. Yes, you may move around quite a lot in seating plans, but maybe up to this point, if you're year one, maybe you haven't actually moved at this point. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't, I don't know. all of your memories will be quite similar. You're sitting in the same place, you've got the same teacher at the front, you've got the same people around you. So your ability to remember lesson by lesson what happened is affected by the fact that your memories are actually quite similar. But there are two ways to go about this. So firstly, you have what's called proactive interference. Proactive interference is when an older memory prevents us from recalling newer memories. And the classic example here that I tend to use is when I accidentally called my current girlfriend by my ex-girlfriend's name. And I came up with, in my opinion, a genius way to get me out of trouble in that situation. I'll explain it in the class. Yeah. I mean, she knew what I did. She knew I'd accidentally called her Emma when her name was Natalie. But she couldn't pin it on me, and I kind of ran away. A little bit. But if they can't catch you, you're not in trouble. So that's a good example about proactive interference. When you cannot remember a newer information because older memories are impacting your ability to recall it. Good example of this as well is when if I taught siblings before in different years, I accidentally call the new sibling by their older brother or sister's name. That's proactive interference. So this is when older memories affect newer memories. The other one is retroactive interference, right? And again, this is relatively easy. This is when a new memory interferes with the ability to recall an older memory. Now, I think this is more common, and a good example of this is my phone number. I changed my phone number at the time of filming, around about 14 years ago. I've had the same number for 14 years. I cannot remember my number for not a chance. Not a chance. My newer memory is affecting my ability to recall an older memory in this case. Same thing applies to classes, by the way. At the time of filming, my second years have not they've not long left, right? I remember my second years very, very well. The year before, I don't remember as much because my newer classes are affecting my ability to recall my old classes. So, quite a simple theory. You need a bit of an acronym here maybe to remember, and all you need to do is remember the word PORN. PORN. Proactive interference is when older affects new. Retroactive is when newer affects old. Porn. So when I say interference, you shout porn. And that would be a very, very easy apologies for the crudeness of that acronym, but it's actually a very good acronym for you to be able to remember. Because you do realise, by the way, how ironic it is if you get proactive and retroactive interference mixed up. If you understand what I've been talking about, this whole theory, you must see the irony of that, right? To get confused about the theory about you getting confused. Don't let it happen, please. So before I move on, that is clearly not enough for you to talk about it for 6 marks worth. Yet that is literally the whole theory. So what is one way in which I'm going to have to get you to show that you know the theories at a deeper level? Give examples. Literally give the examples that I've given. Maybe not my psychology teacher called his new girlfriend by his ex-girlfriend's name, but give that generalized example. The reason why this is important, if you give examples that back up what you are talking about, real life examples, it shows you know the theory to a deeper level. And you're not simply just parroting information off a flashcard. So make sure you give examples, please. You also need to know I'd say at least one piece of research. I'm going to give you 2 pieces of research because I'm such a generous guy. The first piece of research is by a guy called Schmidt et al. The et al. Means and others, right? So Schmidt in 2000. Now remember, Schmidt is not named in the spec. I'll say that again. Schmidt is not named in the spec. So you only need to actually know what Schmidt et al. Found. You don't really need to know everything, but I will go through the procedure. He got a map of Molenberg in the Netherlands. Do not call it Holland, right? Because Holland is a part of the Netherlands. That's like calling Hampshire the UK. Or the UK Hampshire, right? That's actually more correct. He got a map of Molenberg, and he replaced 48 street names with numbers. And he gave it to people who had moved around in Molenberg or moved outside of Molenberg, for example. And he got them to try recall how many street names they could remember. There was a positive correlation, so that a relationship between the number of times a person moved and the number of street names they had forgotten. The more times you move, the more street names you forget. Now, that may be slightly common sense, but it's also evidence of retroactive interference, because your newer streets that you live in are affecting the older streets that you lived in as a kid. You also need to know Baddeley and Hitch. Hitch rhymes with pitch. Who plays on pitches? Rugby players. So it was about rugby players, and I'm not going to go through this in any detail really, but if you want to pause the video, this is another good piece of evidence about how memories do not decay, but it is a case of interference. So make sure you know both Schmidt et al. In 2000, and then 23 years later, Baddeley and Hitch in 1977 as well. Now, in terms of evaluations, I apologise for the matching of my mustard shirt with this mustard slide, but in terms of evaluations, there's some good evaluations here. The problem with interference is it only explains similar memories. Right? It doesn't explain why you don't know where your keys are. It doesn't explain why you forgot you walked into a room. That one doesn't explain. It doesn't explain why you can't remember things when you're sober after being drunk. It doesn't explain that at all. So therefore, it kind of does have lowered explanatory power. However, there are a ton of practical applications from this. There are a ton of practical applications. So if we can learn that actually interference is quite important, we can actually help people revise better, maybe teach them to find differences in two similar things. So if you're revising French and Spanish, try identify the differences between them. That's going to reduce the amount that they are similar, for example. There is research support, as I've previously talked about. Baddeley and Hitch rhymes with pitch, who plays on pitches, rugby players, but also Schmidt et al. In 2000. So again, that increases the validity and the reliability. Most pieces of research take place in the lab, which is quite bad, but also this point is particularly good. And I quite like this point. I think this is a university style point, really. Interference just says what happens. It doesn't say why or how. It doesn't say why interference happens in some people and not others, but it also doesn't explain how interference happens. So an elaboration of this, which I would absolutely make sure you write down, is it doesn't explain individual differences as to why some people have interference and some people don't. So big issue. Bishop. And there is a model peel here as well. I want to go into another type of forgetting here. Cue-dependent forgetting. Pretty simple, this one. A little bit different to interference, but this is all to do with the fact that the reason why you can't remember something is because you do not have the right cues in order to retrieve that information. So basically, this is based on the idea that we only remember something if we are in the same internal or external environment as to when the memory was made. This is why you do not sit your exams in the room in which you learnt the information, because you would have an unfair advantage. So you are made to sit in an unfamiliar environment. The two terms you really need to know here are context and state. And I'm basically going to go through state dependent forgetting as well as context dependent forgetting. But I want to contextualize this in an example, and we're going to go to a very magical place for this, actually. We're going to go to a very magical place. We're going to go to Shirley High Street in Southampton, Foy's Corner. I grew up here. Good times. Very missed Shirley High Street. I grew up here. Quite a few years ago, I was drunk, coming home from a night out, as most people are drunk on Shirley High Street, actually. But I was actually drunk coming home from a night out. And I remember walking, and I will tell this story fully in class. I'll go through the very basics now, but I was basically following a couple that were getting quite uncomfortable with me following them. I didn't know them. And I was drunk. I'm quite a happy drunk. I'm quite an emotional drunk. And they were holding hands as they were walking by. And I was basically saying how they should go home, and they should treasure each other, and they should love each other. I think I was quite lonely at the time, to be honest. But I remember I got to Foy's Corner, right, this magical place just here, and I identified the golden lights of Quality Kebabs in Shirley, which a couple of years later, full disclosure, I got food poisoning from and ended up in hospital, right? They are called Quality Kebabs. Anyway, yeah, good times. You don't really know you're ill until you have sick that's black. Anyway, sorry, emetophobes in the class. I walked into, on this night, the couple were, I think they were in a rush to be somewhere, because they were running off quite quickly, and I was obviously keeping pace with them and complimenting them and stuff. Anyway, I got to Quality Kebabs, and I went in and I bought a kebab. And I came out and I had my wallet in my hand. I remember that clearly. I had my wallet in my hand as I walked out. The next day I woke up and I was just hanging. And I needed a McDonald's, more fast food. And so I went to start looking for my wallet, but couldn't find it. I remembered I left Quality Kebabs with it. The reason why I couldn't remember the next day where my wallet was, or what I did with my wallet, was because I was in a different internal state as I was when I made it, and I was in a different external environment. For example, when I was trying to remember what happened when I was blind drunk, I couldn't remember it because I was sober. When I was trying to remember when I was sat at home, I used to live in Foundry Lane, which is around the corner from this. When I was living in Foundry Lane, I couldn't remember where I put my wallet, because this is Shirley High Street, so it was a different external environment. Really, this is just an excuse for me to see Shirley High Street again. But that is basically an anecdote about how in being in a different internal and external environment actually changes our ability to be able to remember things. So other internal environments include, but are not limited to, mood, hunger, tiredness, drunkenness. If you are sober when you try to remember something when you're drunk, if you're tired when you make a memory but you're trying to remember it when you're really hyper, for example, if you're hungry when you had the memory and you're trying to remember it just after eating, you will not be able to do so. So as it says there in bold, if the internal state we have matches that of the one we had when we made the memory, we are more likely going to remember. But remember, this bullet point is not called remembering, it's called forgetting. So the theory is you have an absence of the same internal cues. So for example, if you revise whilst hungry and then you sit the exam whilst hungry, you're going to be much more likely going to recall the information. But remember, you need to know why we forget, not why we remember. And a question I do want to ask I'll ask it rhetorically, but in my lessons, I will actually ask this. Has anyone ever truly lost their temper? As in, truly lost their temper. And you feel that heat building up inside of you, and you think, oh my God, it's going to go. Oh my God. And you have one last rational thought. That's usually something like, just don't throw it at them. And then it comes out here and you just go absolutely mad at someone. I bet you can't remember word for word what you said now, because you are no longer in that same emotional state as you were. So a piece of research you need to know is Overton 1972. This is a great piece of research. That again is not named in the spec, but basically he got people to remember material either drunk or sober, and then got them to recall the information drunk or sober. So basically recall was poorer when the participants were in the different internal state. So if they learned the information when they were sober, but then you got them to recall it when they were drunk, they could never do it. Or rather, it was poor when they could do it, and vice versa. So if you got them to learn materials when they're drunk, like, this is circle, right? And then later on, you got them to recall it when they were sober, they wouldn't be able to, which is why we don't remember things when we're drunk the next day, right? We don't remember things the next day because we're in a different internal state. There is another good piece of research here as well, sort of linked to Overton, but again, this is just an additional piece of research I would know alongside. Now, everyone is going to go for Overton and definitely know Overton, but if you really want it, if you're going for the high grades here, the A star, the A, the B, you also need to know Goodwin as well, so you may want to recall it as well. Very similar to Overton, but probably worth knowing. The other side to this is context-dependent forgetting. This is the external environment, right? This is the external, and it's basically the same thing as state, only this time it's external. You're in a different environment. So one thing I often get my students to do, we're going to go back to the wonderful world of Shirley now, actually, is I went to Foundry Lane. I went to Foundry Lane School. Why aren't you remembering? I've really buggered this up. Can I, no, can you go over there? Can I drag this? Oh, I can drag this. Oh, we're going to go on a journey, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to go on a journey to Foundry Lane School. Oh, you're facing the wrong way there. There you are. Right, now, yeah, admittedly I am. Oh, they've changed it. Have they changed it, you little bastards? Someone just walking across the road there. Now, this is my old school. Just having a look at, so I don't even need to be in the same environment. Just having a look at this. Well, firstly, actually, I may say it's in class, but people from Southampton, can we talk about these children outside the schools? What the frigging hell are the council doing by putting these creepy ass children outside the schools? I know why they're doing it, but it's still creepy. Anyway, I remember, firstly, that building wasn't there. That monstrosity of a building wasn't there. But I remember from this window just here, my teacher dropping a tennis ball and a melon out of it to demonstrate gravity. Now, I've only remembered that now because, and I've just remembered another one actually, because I'm in the same external environment. I know I'm not literally in Foundry Lane now, but just seeing it remembers. I do actually remember walking down, there's a little pathway just to the left, just here. I do remember being so thirsty because I was such a deprived child that it was raining and I just put my head up and tried drinking the rain. I remember that. I've not thought about that in a long time actually, and I've just remembered that being here. So this is all to do with being in the same environment. And the main piece of research you need to know here is Godden and Baddeley. So Godden has got 2 Ds in it. Baddeley has got 2 Ds in it, but Diver only has 1. And this is about 18 divers in a diving club. So they were asked to learn 36 unrelated words. And again, this isn't named in the spec, but you absolutely do need to know about Godden and Baddeley. And they had 4 conditions. You learn on the beach, you recall on the beach, you learn on the beach, but you recall underwater. You learn underwater, you recall on the beach. And obviously, you learn underwater, you recall underwater. make sure you write that down, probably useful. And the results basically show that you did much, much better in recalling things if you were recalling them in the same environment. So how did they recall things underwater? They just had laminated sheets and they would hold up, I don't know, tree or chicken or bibliography or whatever, right? I don't really know. But if you have a look at the results, I would make a note of those results, definitely, those stats. Make a note of those stats. So again, I'm going to move on, but if you needed to pause it, you may want to pause it just now. Okay, evaluations. A problem with this theory, remember, because you have to evaluate the theory. A problem with this theory is that it is backed up by a lot of research that doesn't tend to have ecological validity. This whole divers thing, I've dived once and it was in a swimming pool and there was no one floating there with laminated card trying to show me things, trying to get me to remember, right? I couldn't remember to breathe properly, let alone knowing what words were in front of me. So it does lower the credibility of the theory because a lot of the tasks, they're just not real to life. There is further research and Abernathy, you probably worthwhile knowing, I think. But that bottom point down there is really important. I think there's another slide there is. The other point down here is really, really important. The studies carried out do not take into account the meaning of the material and the level of motivation of the person. That diving task, imagine if I told you, okay, if you forget this, I'm going to kill you. You're probably going to remember a lot more, right? So it's not as simple as, oh, you're in a different environment. This theory doesn't take into account the level of motivation of the person. What happens if you had someone who really tried? For Christ's sake, a lot of you are going to remember, a lot of you are going to be taught things in a classroom, yet you're going to remember everything in the exam hall. So clearly this theory is okay to an extent. What happens if you really, really want to do well? You can get round the issue of a lack of cues. A couple of pieces of research here as well, particularly at the bottom point amuses me. A lot of this research is unethical. You're getting people drunk, you're getting people high, and then getting them to remember things. You might turn around and say, well, they consented to do it. At the end of the day, you're not protecting them from harm. You're getting them drunk, you're getting them high. These are poisonous substances. And then I know some students will be like, oh, give over, it's just a bit of alcohol in it, just a bit of weed, whatever. But at the end of the day, you're not protecting them from harm. So that may actually have a bit of an issue. And once again, there is a point about that. Okay. Crummy how it's warm. See the sweat shining off my dome-like head. That, as far as I'm aware, is everything. It's worth paying attention to this question just here because this came up. I think this might have been a spec paper, I don't know, or a real paper. Martin is studying his modern languages exams. He revises French followed by Spanish on the same night and then gets confused between the two. That's clearly interference. French and Spanish are similar European languages, so there's going to be a lot of interference between them. He remembers the French word for chair instead of the Spanish word for chair. Now, what is that, proactive or retroactive? What one did he do first? Is it older affects new? That's proactive. Or is it newer affects old? That's retroactive. So he revises French followed by Spanish. So you would need to know whether that's proactive or retroactive. Sometimes his mum helps to test Martin's vocabulary when he is unable to remember a word. His mum tells him the first letter, and then he can often recall it. So you would argue that as a cue there as well. There are better questions, but that is something you probably do want to do. Or this question, which is a toughie, describe and evaluate interference, which is a very small theory. For 6 marks, you're going to have to put everything you know, including examples. That is everything. A couple of more points there as well, a couple of more questions. That is everything for forgetting. Not the hardest bullet point ever. The next bullet point is, I think, quite a bit hard. The next 2 bullet points are actually probably tougher than this. But I hope that was useful. Peace out, my gangland homies.